"You're a liability, Brielle," the manager sneered, tossing a meager stack of crumpled bills onto the rain-slicked pavement. Brielle clutched her worn gray hoodie over the prominent curve of her stomach, her long natural curls dampening in the cold morning air. A pregnant waitress in a place like this? It's bad for the aesthetic. Nobody wants to see a charity case while they're eating steak. The kitchen staff crowded the back alley, their laughter sharp as glass. "Who even is the father, Brielle?" one of them mocked, leaning against the brick wall. "Or did you forget his name the second the lights came on?" Brielle felt the familiar sting of humiliation prickling behind her eyes, her wounded expression deepening as she knelt to gather the fallen calves. She was 21, broke, and carrying a child into a world that had already decided she was nothing but a leeching parasite. "He's nobody," she whispered to herself, the lie tasting like ash. She remembered the cold, controlled intensity of the man from that one night, the way he had looked at her like she was the only thing in the room before vanishing into the shadows of the city. Suddenly, the mocking laughter died out. The heavy, pressurized purr of a high-end engine vibrated through the alleyway. A fleet of obsidian black sedans cut through the fog, their tires screeching to a perfectly synchronized halt. The lead car's door opened, and 4 men in razor-sharp suits stepped out, their faces devoid of emotion. Brielle froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The manager's smirk vanished, replaced by a pale, trembling mask of fear. As the back door of the central sedan swung open, the 4 bodyguards instantly snapped into a deep, disciplined bow. "Madam," they spoke in unison, their voices a low thunder that silenced the street. Lee Sung-woo stepped out of the vehicle, the Mafia king in the flesh. His fitted black suit was immaculate, his gaze scanning the alley with a lethal, calculated calm. He didn't look at the manager or the bullies. His eyes locked onto Brielle, softening only by a fraction as he noted the dampness of her hair and the crumpled money in her hand. He walked toward her, the sound of his designer shoes on the pavement sounding like a death knell for everyone else present. Reaching out, he placed a protective, possessive hand on the small of her back, pulling her into his space with dangerous power. "Who did this?" Sung-woo asked, his voice a quiet, terrifying silk. The manager began to stammer, but Sung-woo didn't wait for the answer. He looked down at Brielle, his thumb grazing her jaw. "I told you to wait for the car, Brielle. My son shouldn't be standing in the rain." "You're a liability, Brielle," the manager sneered, tossing a meager stack of crumpled bills onto the rain-slicked pavement. Brielle clutched her worn gray hoodie over the prominent curve of her stomach, her long natural curls dampening in the cold morning air. A pregnant waitress in a place like this? It's bad for the aesthetic. Nobody wants to see a charity case while they're eating steak. The kitchen staff crowded the back alley, their laughter sharp as glass. "Who even is the father, Brielle?" one of them mocked, leaning against the brick wall. "Or did you forget his name the second the lights came on?" Brielle felt the familiar sting of humiliation prickling behind her eyes, her wounded expression deepening as she knelt to gather the fallen calves. She was 21, broke, and carrying a child into a world that had already decided she was nothing but a leeching parasite. "He's nobody," she whispered to herself, the lie tasting like ash. She remembered the cold, controlled intensity of the man from that one night, the way he had looked at her like she was the only thing in the room before vanishing into the shadows of the city. Suddenly, the mocking laughter died out. The heavy, pressurized purr of a high-end engine vibrated through the alleyway. A fleet of obsidian black sedans cut through the fog, their tires screeching to a perfectly synchronized halt. The lead car's door opened, and 4 men in razor-sharp suits stepped out, their faces devoid of emotion. Brielle froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The manager's smirk vanished, replaced by a pale, trembling mask of fear. As the back door of the central sedan swung open, the 4 bodyguards instantly snapped into a deep, disciplined bow. "Madam," they spoke in unison, their voices a low thunder that silenced the street. Lee Sung-woo stepped out of the vehicle, the Mafia king in the flesh. His fitted black suit was immaculate, his gaze scanning the alley with a lethal, calculated calm. He didn't look at the manager or the bullies. His eyes locked onto Brielle, softening only by a fraction as he noted the dampness of her hair and the crumpled money in her hand. He walked toward her, the sound of his designer shoes on the pavement sounding like a death knell for everyone else present. Reaching out, he placed a protective, possessive hand on the small of her back, pulling her into his space with dangerous power. "Who did this?" Sungwoo asked, his voice a quiet, terrifying silk. The manager began to stammer, but Sungwoo didn't wait for the answer. He looked down at Brielle, his thumb grazing her jaw. "I told you to wait for the car, Brielle. My son shouldn't be standing in the rain." Would you like me to write the next chapter, where Brielle enters Sungwoo's world and meets his inner circle? The sanctuary of the Lee estate was soon breached by a poison that no wall could keep out: gossip. By the end of the week, the silent whispers of the underworld had curdled into a loud, dangerous narrative. At a high-end gala meant to consolidate power, the air grew thick with the mention of Brielle's mysterious months in poverty. Members of the rival park syndicate circulated a grainy photo of Brielle from the alleyway, suggesting that a nobody from the streets could never carry the pure blood of a king. Brielle stood at the edge of the ballroom, her natural curls styled into an elegant crown, yet she felt like a fraud in her silk gown. She could feel the predatory gazes of the elite, their eyes sliding over the curve of her stomach with newfound mockery. A street girl's brat, she overheard a syndicate daughter hiss, trying to pass off a stray as a prince. The room went cold as Sungwoo entered. He didn't head for the bar or the head table. He walked straight to the center of the floor, where the head of the park syndicate stood laughing. The Mafia king was a vision of controlled, terrifying stillness. "I heard a rumor," Sungwoo began, his voice barely a whisper, yet loud enough to stop the music. "A rumor that someone in the city doubts my word. Someone who thinks I wouldn't recognize my own flesh and blood." The rival leader smirked, swirling his drink. "We just find the timing convenient, Lee. A girl like that, who knows who she was with while you were away?" The violence was so swift, it was almost artistic. Sungwoo didn't reach for a gun. He moved with the lethal precision of a man who had taught skills to the best. In a single blur of motion, he grabbed the man's hand, slamming it onto the marble table and driving a steak knife through the wood, pinning the man's palm to the surface. The ballroom erupted in gasps, but no one dared move. Sungwoo leaned in close, his face inches from his screaming rival. "If I hear this lie again, if even a breath of doubt touches Brielle or my son, I won't stop at your hand," he promised with dangerous power. He turned back to the room, his gaze landing on Brielle. The ice in his eyes thawed into a possessive, protective heat. He walked over and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close so the entire underworld could see her ownership. "This is my queen," he declared to the trembling crowd. "And anyone who calls her a liar will find their tongue on the floor." The heavy, ornate doors of the private tea room swung open to reveal a woman who looked like a porcelain doll carved from ice. This was Park Min-hee, the daughter of a rival syndicate and the woman the underworld expected to be Sungwoo's bride in a business-arranged marriage. She didn't stand when Brielle entered. She simply adjusted the sleeve of her designer blazer, her eyes scanning Brielle with a clinical, predatory coldness. "So, this is the little distraction everyone is whispering about," Min-hee said, her voice smooth and sharp as a razor blade. She gestured toward the chair opposite her, her gaze lingering on Brielle's natural curls and the loose fit of her maternity gown with visible disdain. Brielle sat, keeping her spine straight despite the exhaustion weighing on her limbs. "I'm not a distraction. I'm the mother of his child." Min-hee laughed, a hollow, melodic sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Darling, in this world, children are just assets, and women like you are merely vessels. Sungwoo is a king. He needs a queen who understands shipping routes and money laundering, not someone who spent her life counting pennies in a diner." She leaned forward, her dangerous power manifesting as a suffocating social pressure. "You think that hickey on his neck or that ring on your finger means victory. To him, you're a temporary toy, a novelty from the streets to satisfy a fleeting protective urge." Brielle felt the familiar prick of humiliation, the echo of being called a leeching parasite by her former boss. But as she looked at Min-hee, she saw the same desperation she had seen in the eyes of her enemies in the alleyway. "If I'm just a toy," Brielle said, her voice gaining a quiet, steady strength, "then why are you so afraid that he won't let go of me?" Min-hee's composure fractured for a fraction of a second, her jaw tightening. "Because toys eventually break, Brielle. And when you do, I'll be the one here to clean up the mess. Don't get comfortable in this palace. The basement is full of things Sungwoo once found interesting." The door opened and Sungwoo stepped in, his presence immediately shifting the room's temperature. He didn't acknowledge Min-hee's business smile. He walked straight to Brielle, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of ownership. That silenced Min-hee instantly. "We're leaving," he said to Brielle, his eyes never leaving Min-hee's pale face. "I don't pay for my woman to be insulted by those who are already losing their relevance." The velvet curtains of the estate felt less like a sanctuary and more like a shroud as Brielle watched Sungwoo's men move through the courtyard with the synchronized precision of a predatory pack. She was tired of being this sweet girl people took things from, tired of holding crumpled cash with trembling hands while others decided her worth. Sungwoo found her in the private gym, her gaze fixed on a collection of sleek, weighted training knives. He didn't offer a gentle greeting. Instead, he stepped behind her, his dangerous power radiating like heat. He placed a heavy, warm hand over hers, guiding her fingers to wrap around the hilt of a blade. "In my world, Brielle, the only thing more dangerous than an enemy is a victim who refuses to learn," he whispered, his voice a low, commanding silk. "You are carrying the future of the Lee Syndicate. That makes you the ultimate target. If I am not there to pull the trigger, you must be the one to do it." The lessons were brutal, designed to strip away the timid girl who had been kicked into the rain. Sungwoo didn't go easy on her because of the pregnancy. Instead, he taught her how to use her center of gravity, how to read the cold exterior of a liar, and how to spot a threat before a word was even spoken. He showed her how to use a firearm with the same calm focus he used to manage his empire, his hands steady against hers as he whispered the mechanics of the unique bullet casings his family favored. As the days blurred, Brielle's wounded expression began to harden into something sharper. She stopped flinching at the sound of raised voices and started observing the power dynamics of the guards who bowed to her. She practiced the set of skills Sungwoo applied to his own life: silence, observation, and the strategic use of fear. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one night, her breath coming in short gasps after a training session. "Most men like you would want me locked in a basement for my own safety." Sungwoo wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek, his thumb lingering with a possessive intensity. "Because a king needs a queen who can hold the throne when his back is turned," he replied. "I don't want a pet, Brielle. I want a partner who knows how to make the world bleed if it ever tries to take her away from me again." Standing tall in the center of the School of Shadows, Brielle felt the last remnants of her poverty-stricken past wither away. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was becoming the weapon the Lee Syndicate never saw coming. The air in the private dining room of the Lee Syndicate's most exclusive hotel was thick with the scent of lilies and cold, unyielding power. Brielle sat at the head of the obsidian table, her long natural curls cascading over a dress of midnight silk that shimmered like a bruise. She no longer looked like the tired, wounded girl from the alley. She looked like a queen who had found her throne. The door opened, and a line of servers entered, their heads bowed in practiced submission. At the end of the line was a man whose face Brielle would never forget, the manager who had tossed her life's savings into the mud. He was dressed in a stiff waiter's uniform, a far cry from the cheap suit he had worn while calling her a liability. Sungwoo leaned back in his chair, his dangerous power radiating from his calm, controlled frame. He didn't look at the servers. His eyes were locked on Brielle, watching for her reaction with a possessive intensity. "The service in this city has become quite lackluster," Sungwoo remarked, his voice a low, terrifying silk. "I thought it was time we brought in some fresh blood to remind them of their place." The former manager approached to pour Brielle's water, his hand shaking so violently the glass clinked against the pitcher. As he leaned in, his eyes finally met Brielle's. The recognition was instantaneous. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly, translucent pale. He remembered the rain, the mockery, and the leeching parasite he had kicked onto the street. "I believe you dropped something last time we met," Brielle said softly, her voice steady and devoid of the timidness that once defined her. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a single, crisp $100 bill, laying it flat on the table. "Consider this a tip for the aesthetic of your service." The man began to tremble, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. He looked at Sungwoo, who was tracing the edge of a steak knife with a lethally distracted air. "Madam," the manager stammered, his voice cracking. I didn't know. Please, I have a family." "So did I," Brielle replied, her gaze hardening into the cold exterior Sungwoo had taught her to wear. "But you decided I was a charity case. Now, finish your job." Sungwoo stood up, his presence immediately suffocating the room. He walked around the table and placed a hand on the back of Brielle's chair, his ownership absolute. "You're dismissed," Sungwoo told the man, though the words sounded more like a sentence than a release. "And remember, every breath you take from this moment on is a gift from the woman you once spat on. Don't make me regret my generosity." As the man stumbled out of the room, Brielle felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. The girl from the alley was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly how much fear a king could give as a gift. The shadows of Brielle's past had a way of creeping back just as she was learning to walk in the light of the Lee estate. Marcus, the man who had abandoned her the moment the pregnancy test turned positive, stood in the dim corner of the garden conservatory, looking remarkably small against the towering glass walls. He didn't see the hidden microphones or the unique bullet casing pinned to Sungwoo's lapel just a few rooms away. He only saw Brielle, dressed in silk, looking like a gold digger who had finally hit the jackpot. "You look well, Brielle," Marcus sneered, his eyes darting around the luxury that surrounded her. "Better than when you were begging me for rent money. I wonder what your Mafia king would think if he knew the real you. The girl who used to cry over a broken light bulb." Brielle stood her ground, her long curls perfectly styled, her wounded expression replaced by the cold exterior Sungwoo had demanded of her. "What do you want, Marcus? I have a life now. A life you aren't part of." "I want my share," Marcus hissed, stepping closer, his presence a dark echo of the hell she had escaped. "I have photos, Brielle. Stories. I can tell the world that baby isn't his. I can make sure your king thinks you're just another leeching parasite who used him to hide a mistake." He leaned in, his voice a low, threatening crawl. "Give me 50,000, or I'll blow your perfect little world to hell." Brielle didn't flinch. She felt the weight of the training Sungwoo had given her, the set of skills that allowed her to see the desperation behind Marcus's bravado. She also knew that Sungwoo was everywhere, his protection an invisible shroud. "You're making a mistake," she said softly, her voice echoing the terrifying silk of the man who owned the very air they breathed. "The only mistake was letting you walk away with my meal ticket," Marcus snapped. The double doors of the conservatory swung open with a heavy, final thud. Sungwoo stepped in, his dangerous power filling the room like a physical pressure. He wasn't rushing. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had already decided the outcome. He held a tablet in one hand, playing back the recording of Marcus's blackmail attempt. "You have a very loud mouth for someone with such a short future," Sungwoo remarked, his eyes locking onto Marcus with a lethal, calculated calm. He walked over to Brielle and placed a possessive hand on her waist, pulling her into his space. Mr. Russo, I was just leaving," Marcus stammered, his face turning a translucent pale as he realized he was trapped in a cage he couldn't escape. "No," Sungwoo whispered, the words sounding like a death knell. "You're going to the basement. I believe you mentioned something about stories. I want to hear every single one before I make sure you never speak again. Would you like me to write Chapter 7, where enemies attempt to kidnap Brielle during a doctor's appointment, and she has to use her training to survive?" The sterile, white hallways of the prenatal clinic felt like a safe haven, but Brielle had learned that for a woman in her position, peace was often just a prelude to a storm. She sat in the waiting area, her hand resting protectively over her stomach, feeling the weight of the small, concealed pistol Sungwoo had insisted she carry. He had followed her with a security detail, but they remained discreetly stationed at the perimeter, leaving her momentarily vulnerable in the private wing. The air changed when 3 men in medical scrubs entered the corridor. Their gait was too heavy, their eyes too alert for orderlies. Brielle's set of skills kicked in. She noticed the bulge of weapons beneath their loose tops and the way they fanned out to block the exits. This was a syndicate trap, orchestrated by those who wanted to strike at Sungwoo's heart by taking his air. "Miss Johnson, there's a change in your exam room," the lead man said, his voice a gravelly lie. He reached for her arm, his grip intended to be a trap. Brielle didn't scream. She remembered the School of Shadows and the dangerous power Sungwoo had instilled in her. As he lunged, she pivoted, using her center of gravity to redirect his momentum. She slammed her palm into his throat, a move designed to blow his hell out, and as he wheezed, she drew the blade from her thigh holster. "I'm not the worthless girl you were told about," she hissed, her cold exterior finally shielding her fear. The other two closed in, but Brielle was no longer a timid target. She kicked a heavy equipment cart into the path of one, creating a barrier, and leveled her firearm at the second. Her hands didn't shake. She was the Mafia King's partner, and she wouldn't allow herself to be sold into human trafficking ever again. "Move again, and I'll show you exactly what kind of biter I've become," she warned, her voice a terrifying mimicry of Sungwoo's own silk. The standoff lasted only seconds before the clinic doors were kicked open. Sungwoo stormed in, his dangerous power radiating like a physical shockwave. He didn't look at the attackers. His eyes went straight to Brielle, noting the knife in her hand and the steady aim of her gun. A flicker of dark, possessive pride crossed his face. "I told you she was a feisty one," Sungwoo remarked to his guards, his gaze finally turning to the men cowering on the floor. He walked to Brielle, wrapping a protective arm around her. "You did well, my queen. But from now on, even the doctors come to us. I'm done letting the world think you're reachable. Would you like me to write Chapter 8, where the rival fiancé attempts to humiliate Brielle at a grand gala, only for the king to reveal his final revenge?" The Grand Winter Gala was a sea of shimmering silk and whispered conspiracies, a place where the city's elite gathered to celebrate power while sharpening their knives. Brielle entered the ballroom on Sungwoo's arm, her presence a silent challenge to everyone who had once called her a leeching parasite. She wore a gown of liquid gold that hugged her pregnancy, her natural curls adorned with diamonds that caught the light like fallen stars. Park Min-hee stood at the center of a judgmental circle, her business fiancé, mask replaced by a look of predatory triumph. As Brielle approached, Min-hee raised her glass, her voice carrying across the silent room. "A lovely dress, Brielle. It almost hides the fact that you're a gold digger from the gutters," she sneered, her eyes flashing with a dangerous power. "But a crown doesn't fit a girl who was sold on the black market. Everyone here knows you're just a temporary toy until the real wedding begins." The circle of socialites chuckled, their baseless accusations hanging in the air like poison. Brielle didn't flinch. She leaned into Sungwoo's protective hold, her cold exterior remaining unshakable. Sungwoo stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Min-hee with a lethal, calculated calm that made the laughter die in an instant. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for a folder held by his lead bodyguard. "You speak of weddings and assets, Min-hee," Sungwoo said, his voice a terrifying low silk. "But you seem to have forgotten that in this city, I am the one who decides who owns what." He tossed the folder onto a nearby table. "As of 10 minutes ago, the Park Syndicate's shipping routes, their real estate holdings, and the very mansion you sleep in have been liquidated. I've canceled every contract your family has left." Min-hee's face turned a translucent, ghostly pale as she realized the bankruptcy looming over her was no longer a threat, it was a reality. You can't do this. That's my inheritance." "Your inheritance belongs to Brielle now," Sungwoo replied, his ownership of the room absolute. "Consider it a late wedding gift for the woman you tried to humiliate. You wanted to play the victim, and now you'll have a reason." As the debt collectors began to filter into the room to escort Min-hee out, Brielle looked at the woman who had called her worthless. "I told you that toys eventually break," Brielle said softly, echoing Min-hee's own words. "It looks like you were the fragile one after all." The silence that followed the collapse of the Park family was not empty. It was heavy with the newfound respect of a city that had watched a poor girl dismantle an empire. Brielle stood on the balcony of the Lee estate, the moonlight catching the gold of her gown and the steady, calm strength in her eyes. The wounded expression that had once defined her was gone, replaced by the stone-cold attitude of a survivor who had avenged every humiliation. Sungwoo stepped out from the shadows, his dangerous power now a warm, protective shroud. He didn't approach her as a savior this time, but as an equal. He noted the way she held herself, no longer flinching, no longer hiding behind a loose hoodie, but standing tall as the mother of the future Mafia king. "They called you a liability," Sungwoo said, his voice a low, tender silk that carried no hint of his usual lethal edge. "They thought your poverty was a weakness, not realizing it was the fire that forged you." He reached out, his thumb grazing her jaw with a possessive heat. "I've spent my life looking for a partner who wouldn't crumble under the weight of my crown. I never expected to find her in a rainy alley, protecting a child she refused to give up on." The city lights twinkled below them, a sprawling kingdom that now answered to her name. Brielle looked at the man who had given her the set of skills to save herself, realizing that while he had provided the tools, the quiet strength had always been hers. Sungwoo dropped to one knee, the movement so rare for a man of his stature that the air seemed to still. He produced a ring, not a business arrangement, but a promise. "Brielle Johnson, you are the only woman strong enough to stand beside me. You are the only queen this syndicate will ever have. Will you marry me?" Brielle felt the last remnants of the betrayed girl vanish into the night. She looked down at the Mafia king, then out at the world she had conquered. "Yes," she whispered, her voice firm and absolute. As he stood and pulled her into a final, possessive embrace, the sweet girl was officially dead. In her place stood a queen, holding the hand of the man who had recognized her power before she even knew it existed. The transformation was complete. The leeching parasite had become the heart of the empire.